Welcome to Buckets. This is Action Network's basketball betting podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm Maria Marino, back here with my partner in crime, Action Network writer Jim Turvey at Turvey Bets. We are talking about the WNBA finals, and it's not gone as we envisioned, Jim. I have to admit, this is a bit of a postmortem for us, just because we were expecting the Liberty to have some fight in them in game two. More so me. I was a little more bullish. I decided to take them on the money line just because I felt it was already a desperation spot. And little did I know, I didn't know the meaning of a desperation spot.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be a bit of a hat in hand episode. Some reflection. I mean, it's not over yet, but I do think it's a very fair thing to do to kind of assess at this point what has I'll speak for myself, but we were both kind of in line. Like what was going wrong? What has happened that the bets have not hit, the Liberty as a whole have not hit. So I think it's a great time to kind of reflect mid-series. And see if we can, still have some use for what our takeaways are as we head to game three.
So I think one thing that may have been skewing my belief in the Liberty, and part of why I went and bet them in game two, was thinking that they had a shot to win this series. And why did I think that? Because out of both teams, they were the ones that won a game on the road in the regular season. Both times the Aces were in New York, were blowouts in favor of New York. And I think now, looking back on that Commissioner's Cup win, it might not have been something to really consider because it was a Maureen Johannes game. Very simple. Like, she provided I believe it was 17 or so points, and something that the Aces were absolutely unprepared for, were absolutely blindsided by, and it was the difference in that particular game. But going into this series, I thought to myself, the Liberty can win one on the road. And when they lost game one, I'm like, well, it's got to be game two. But perhaps just my view of how this season series went was just covered up by or clouded by Maureen's performance. And I think here again, Jim, I don't know what to do with her. Coach Sandy Brondello doesn't know what to do with her. And it's a question of, like, is it now too late? Because as we talked about after game one, she had a splashy performance then, and the Libs couldn't capitalize. But I think there's a bit of a quandary going on with her involvement or lack thereof, and it truly making a bigger difference than we envisioned.
Well, and I think you're right to highlight that Commissioner's Cup game, because that was honestly a large part of my cap as well. And, I was weighing, bigger sample of just the second half of the season. But to me, that Commissioner's Cup game is the most confusing to me, because the thing I keep getting hung up on is it has looked like the Aces have a second gear that the Liberty do not have. And so I keep coming back to why did that not appear in the Commissioner's Cup game? And I was talking to Jen Hatfield about it. She had a great point talking about how that was during that really rough stretch of the season for the Aces, where they had, the 5-7 was around that time. They really did have a tough stretch of schedule. And now we came into this series talking about how they'd only played, this is going to be their sixth game in like a month or something crazy, right? So if this is a team that, and the rest versus rust was something I think we talked about maybe not mattering. Looks like maybe it did matter, and maybe it mattered toward the rest side. They were able to find that a second gear that during the heat of the middle of the season, that Commissioner's Cup game, it's kind of slipped into the regular season schedule. They didn't have the time to get the batteries fully charged enough. And we can talk about this later, but I do think Chelsea Gray is kind of the engine that really drives that kind of dog in the Aces. And, she's also one of the older players on the team. She was probably about as worn down at that part of the season as she has been far more than during the finals, ironically, because they've been made such quick work of the postseason. So I do think that was part of, my read of the cap was maybe overweighing that Commissioner's Cup game. I still think there is some weirdness going on, and maybe we can walk through some of the potential kind of big picture misses on this read. But I think that Commissioner's Cup game, weighing that maybe a little bit too much, is something that I'll try to learn from in terms of my capping of this series, but also just like looking ahead towards future WNBA finals and seasons and stuff like that.
Well, look, I think you make a great point about the rest, because one thing that I kept saying to myself were, okay, the Liberty were the better team in the second half. They had the better win percentage, and they played the Aces better. But to your point, it was during that stretch when the Aces had so many games in so few days. And I think I underestimated just the importance of the number one seed, because not only did you get to play weaker opponents, you were able to win every game and keep them as short as possible, to your point, and stay rested. Now, in my head, my logic was, which I said in our finals preview, I felt like the Liberty were more battle tested. Like, okay, they were able to win an ugly game against Washington. They were able to come back from a loss to Connecticut and win 3 in a row, even some closer games. Maybe my perspective was wrong in terms of maybe they were just not as good, and that's why they struggled against these teams, as opposed to me feeling like, okay, the Aces haven't seen adversity yet. What is going to happen when they see that adversity? But of course, they've really faced very little resistance. So just to recap, game 2 a little bit further, the defense is a huge question mark for New York. It's something that I don't understand fully why it's fallen off. It almost seems to defy logic and science and physics, because I don't know about you, there were so many shots, so many improbable shots went in for Vegas, in my opinion. Some, were uncontested, and there was a lack of defensive discipline. But then there were some that were very highly contested and somehow found their way in the hoop. I literally was like, what is going on with these baskets?
Well, I definitely. Oh, sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay. On. No, you go.
I think two things can be true at once, right? That they have found now in 2 straight finals. This was kind of the case last year, where especially Chelsea Gray, but Kelsey Plum's out there with a broken finger making threes. They have found some ability to make shots at a level that doesn't fully seem sustainable, but at some point you got to just kind of tip your hat and say it's happening. So it doesn't matter if it's sustainable; it is happening. And then on top of that, the Liberty, I think we've all seen that they don't look like the aggressors. They don't look like. They look a little scared, which is wild. And I'm not typically one to lay value on like what a team looks like out there, but I don't think anyone watching can kind of deny that there is a difference watching these two teams. Right. One team looks like the far superior team. You wouldn't think it was the finals. There looks like such a gap between the two of them that's got to be some factor in it.
Right. I agree. And the people that look the most scared, I think, are Courtney Vandersloot, who again, part of why we bet a prop her points over, which was only 9.5, which she got to 9 and blew layups, missed a free throw.
Well, the ESPN box score even said it got to 10 for a hot second. I was celebrating a last second backdoor cover, and then they updated the backdoor, and it was a loss, like most of the other bets.
And we knew that was part of the Aces strategy, lay off, and she knew it. And she knew she was going to have open looks, and she was still hesitating. Rebecca Lobo even said at one point during the broadcast, like, she should not have passed up that shot. Like, she was open and she passed it up. Now, I know she's not typically who you think of as a scorer, but she has had shining moments in her career as a scorer and as a clutch player. And it's not the same as like the Liberty laying off Kia Stokes, right? Who, by the way, made 2 threes, had 8 points, had 0 in the first game. And as unlikely a scenario as you could draw up, but Becky Hammon's team was ready for it.
Yeah.
And that's I think another big edge that you and I have talked about is Becky Hammon seems to be out coaching Sandy Brondello. And I'm not saying it's all of Sandy's fault, because these players some of them are superstars, and they should not be playing as timid or looking as timid as they've been. So a lot of it is on the players, but Sandy seems like she's as much at a loss as we are.
Well, and that's definitely true. And I had this kind of to talk through at some point of, some of the factors I think I, maybe missed when capping this. And I think coaching is a very big factor. We've noticed the second halves of both games have notably tilted to the Aces. Game 1, the Liberty, it feels like a century ago, but the Liberty had the lead at half of Game 1. And I think what Becky's doing so well, I mean, first of all, she's just a phenomenal coach, but I think she's done a really good job. If you believe in the motivation of athletes by kind of doing the disrespect, right? I think she has done a great job of flipping the narrative into a way that, they were minus 200, minus 210 or whatever in the series. They were the favorite. But I think especially with the Stewie MVP, I think if you saw a lot of people, even though the Aces were minus 200 in the market, a lot of people were talking about picking the Liberty for the finals. I mean, the two of us here, but if you go broader than that, ESPN, The Athletic, there was a skew towards Liberty more than 1 in 3 for sure. So I think she's done a great job, and she's, you see her post-game press conferences, she looks pissed. And I think I don't think it's an act. I think that there is a feeling that they are the best team. They truly believe that they are much head and shoulders the best team, and they are not talked about in that way. I think she's done an incredible job of leveraging that to really get her players up for these games.
Yeah, we went from the disrespect with the CT on to suddenly the defending champs and the favorites playing the disrespect card, but the motivation factor is working. And I did hear part of her post-game presser from Wednesday night, and I just remember her saying, they're the real deal. They're a real team, talking about her team, of course. But in the back of my head, I was like, that kind of sounds like a shot at the Liberty. It's like, they're not the real deal. They're not a real team. And of course, the core four of Las Vegas has been together. They won a championship last year. It's still a newer team, and we saw a lot more continuity with the Liberty in the second half, but it's still clearly not to that level where these stars on the Aces are playing with so much confidence. They're playing nearly flawlessly. And at this point, I'm not sure that I can advise fading them going into the next game. And we'll get into that game in just a second. But just to illustrate the lopsidedness of Wednesday night. So Liberty, 36% from the field, 23% from 3. And that's with Jonquel Jones being incredibly efficient. So if you took out of it, I don't want to know what that number is. And then the Aces, 53% from the floor, 45% from 3. We even saw Asia Wilson have the audacity to shoot a 3, but she was wide open, so I don't blame her. But again, that was just an example of
Can I hop in there really quick? Because so walking through these, how did we get here? How did we get down 2-0? A couple of the factors I think, I mentioned before, the coaching factor, I think undersold. I think it is, they're the Liberty just don't appear to have the same aggression like that. Those I think are both big factors I miss on. I'm going to say an obnoxious one that seems like a cop out, but there is a fair amount of shooting variance that has gone on in these two games. This is two home games for the Aces, and these two teams are basically, the turnovers are basically even. The Liberty have one more for the series, but they have several more offensive rebounds, so they've had more possessions. The Aces shot it a little bit better during the regular season, but again, the Liberty were a little bit better on the offensive glass. It really has come down to the shooting. Now, I think our eyes are telling us that there is clearly something more than just if the shots are going in or not to this series. But I do think that the shooting variance has had a big impact on the series. Now, you can flip that any way you want and say, yeah, they're making more because they're more confident, and the Liberty are missing way more because, especially on that end, they just look shook and like they couldn't buy a basket, outside of JJ if they wanted to right now. But I do think that, if you zoom out large enough, and the 5-game series is not enough to zoom out large enough, but the variance would not be to the level it has been at through these first 2 games. I personally do not. That does not make me confident enough to bet Liberty in Game 3. We'll talk through how to approach that. But I do think that is a factor that at least needs to be acknowledged, even though it's obnoxious and it sounds like you're just trying to cop out of your pick at the beginning. But it has come down to who has made more shots. They have the same amount of possessions each game, basically, and it's been a matter of Aces making and Liberty missing.
I would be curious also to know if we really were able to break down the difference in contested versus uncontested shots, because it seemed like, yet again, the Aces were not only hitting the open shots that they should, but also hitting contested shots, whereas the Liberty, I felt like, had very few opportunities that were uncontested or open looks, and then that got them out of such a rhythm. So it's a credit to the Vegas defense that when they did have open looks, they were not confident. And you saw that a little bit with Benajelani, who played better, was more aggressive, but still went under her point total. And speaking of playing aggressive, if you remember at the end of the last thing I said on our previous podcast right before Game 2 was I wanted to see the Liberty be more aggressive so that they could put a little bit of pressure on the rotation of Becky Hammon and put a little more pressure on her from a decision-making standpoint and a real-time coaching standpoint. And the Liberty getting, within 8 by halftime and having a really strong second quarter was because they were doing that, right? They started going at the Aces in the paint. And at the half, Alicia Clark had 3 fouls and
Jackie had 3 fouls.
Jackie Young had 3 fouls. And so you started to see Becky have to make decisions, right? She sat Jackie for a lot of that second quarter because of the foul trouble. And so I was feeling okay at half in terms of just the way that we expected this to go, because I was like, okay, this is working. But to your point earlier, Becky then counter moved on the chessboard, and all of a sudden, Jonquel, who was such a workhorse in the in the first half, was somehow neutralized in the second half.
0 rebounds in the second half.
I don't even know how. So I'm going to defend you a little bit because what was it? Was 10.5 the number for rebounds?
Yeah, she has now missed her rebound prop in both games, despite collecting 19 rebounds in the first halves of these 2 games. She's gotten 1 total rebound in the second half, which is wild.
And that's what I mean by like almost defying logic. And one other thing I want to point out, which I mentioned to you earlier, the lowest plus minus on the team point differential was Brianna Stewart at -27. And the only player on the Liberty with a positive plus minus was Maureen Johannes, 1 point, which is still interesting to me. And let's start to get into how, our preview for Game 3. But I want to
hop in because you made 2 really good points I want to address. So first of all, you mentioned like wanting to be able to see the contested field goal. We got to get this. Like, this is stuff that the NBA has, because I don't want to trust my eyes. It does feel like the Aces have made an absurd amount of contested shots and the Liberty have missed a fair amount of open, but I want to see the numbers. We got to get this, WNBA. Come on. What are we doing here? We got to get this. But to your second point, and I think this is something that I want to make sure I do, because I've given credit to Becky Hammon. I've blamed poor shooting. I've said the Liberty looks scared. The Aces players have been incredible. And I think maybe the perfect pivot point on is you mentioned Jackie with those 3 fouls in the first half. She finished the game with 0. So, I mean, she or with 3. She didn't have -3 in the second half. She in the whole second half, she played aggressive, strong, smart. The Aces are just playing very well. I want to make sure that is noted because the players themselves are playing incredibly. Like that's something that's easy to get lost, but that's just how it is.
I fully agree. And I mean, the first game was the tale of the two backcourts, and it wasn't even close, not even a little bit, in favor of the Liberty. But I just felt like, okay, just naturally you would think that there would be just a little bit of regression, but that did not occur. There was, in fact, they were better in game 2. And on top of that, Asia Wilson was better in game 2. And, she ends up getting double-digit boards. She had by far her best game against the Liberty that we've seen this season. And that's scary because I feel like she could even play better. And so, all right, let's get into game 2. But first, I have to remind everyone, Buckets is presented by BetMGM. Use bonus code ACTION when signing up to get up to $1,500 paid back in bonus bets if your first bet loses. For new users in Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Okay, on to game 3. Aces are favored by 2.5, and they will be at Barclays Center for a 3 p.m. Eastern tip Sunday on ABC. By the way, we're both going.
Yeah, we got to switch the juju up a little bit. Something's got to happen.
Yeah, well, look, I'll say this. Regardless of the outcome, I'm just going to be so excited to be there and see these two teams, because even though the Liberty have looked like shells of themselves in this series and, just not played their best, these are still two historically great teams with a lot of star power. It's been great for the league all year long to have this conversation about super teams. I know some people aren't partial to that term, but to me, it's not a negative thing to have super teams, because what we're talking about here is teams that have some stars that aren't necessarily homegrown, that are acquired in free agency or via trade, that are compiled. We're talking about a team that is, the Liberty were compiled specifically to try to challenge the Aces. And, for the regular season, they did just that. Thus far in the postseason, have not. But as it stands with this game 3, this is kind of how I feel. I thought that game 2 was must win. This is obviously the literal definition of must win for the Liberty. And if you're going to ask me, where do I lean? I lean with that home court advantage. I lean with the fact that the Liberty are not as bad as they've played, and that they will get a game. But I don't think I'm going to bet it, Jim, because I just think that, these past 2 games have been so lopsided, and the Aces are playing so dangerous because they are so confident and they are so sure that they are champions, like at this moment, that I don't even know if the crowd in Brooklyn is going to have any say in it. I think the crowd might help the Liberty side of things, but I just don't know. I just don't know about actually, backing aside here, because as great as the Aces are playing, I do feel like the Liberty, might still have a push in them, might still be able to get a game here. But I'm not feeling strongly about a side.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in lockstep with you. It's really interesting to see the spread. So in game 1, it closed about -4.5 for the Aces. In game 2, they threw out -4.5 again. So it didn't really move from game 1 to game 2. And I think that's partially, we talked before last game about how it there's a read that you could have had on that game one that was just a tale of two halves, right? The
Mm-hmm.
Liberty looked like you and I had expected in the first half, and then the second half was obviously a much different animal.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have seen that for 3 straight halves, and this line has swung enormously. So that the Aces are favored by 2.5, which is almost like I'm trying to do some math, but like I think it's like a 4-point swing off of what would if you just normally flipped home court. So they went from a 0-point swing after the game one win to a 4-point swing. And it kind of seems like they probably undercorrected on the first game and maybe overcorrected
For this
to
one.
like where it should be about. Because I think I can't bet the Liberty. I think it would be approaching the definition of insanity of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Absolutely. And then, go on.
No, I do have. So I do have a play though, because we still got to give out something here for the people.
Sure.
So and you're gonna laugh. It's gonna start off with the Liberty, but here's how I'm looking at this. And there's a trend that's known among NBA bettors in the playoffs. When a series is 0-2 and then that team goes home, the first half is a really good spot to look at that team. So I do think that the Liberty, that right now they're plus 100, they're about even money, but obviously the Aces are still favored a little bit. I think that probably should switch. I think the Liberty should be favored in the first half by about a point and a half, something like that. But I am going to parlay it with the Aces second half, because I think there are a couple of different ways you can get there with this game script. First of all, you could have the Aces finally wake up and they have an awesome first half, and then they've got like a 15-point lead.
The Liberty finally wake up.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Yes, the Liberty finally wake up. The Aces, cut into the lead in the second half, but the Liberty finally, they get one game. Maybe they lose the series, but they get this game 3 energized by going home. So that's one route to getting this Liberty first half, Aces second half. But it could also be that the Liberty are up, 2 or 3 at the half. And then the Aces just run away in the second half. That's exactly what we saw in game one. I could very much see it happening in this. So you have a couple of different routes to get there on this Liberty first half, Aces second half. The books, I don't know if they'll fully treat it as negatively correlated, because sometimes, if a team is out to a big lead in the second half, that other team can be a good spread bet. Right. So I don't know if it will be negatively correlated to give you an even bigger edge, but I think that Liberty first half, Aces second half is a way to not fully abandon betting on a game that I don't know which way to go on, but feels like it has several paths to victory. Right.
So here is my one hesitation with that, and let me get your thoughts. Another thing we talked about last episode, this snowball effect, as you dubbed it. So you had actually advised, if it looks like one team is running away with it in the first half, maybe, bet them more and double down on them more, because we have only really seen blowouts between these two teams. So I guess my thought is, okay, if the Liberty do come out and they punch first and they're doing well, what do you think about their ability to let that snowball? And I'll say this, I would be hesitant to expect that the Aces are going to roll over in the way that the Liberty would, because not only are they, playing to an extremely high level, but going back to that coaching advantage, I believe, and Becky's proven ability to make adjustments at half, I do tend to feel like that's a really solid play.
No, it's a phenomenal play, and it's funny because I did not listen to myself when I said I should bet the live snowball effect.
Hold on, in your defense, the Liberty were getting it together in the second quarter, which made it was misleading, or almost like, wait, maybe they're not dead yet, because they seemed like they found something, and then second half, never mind.
I think the time to have played it would have been that third quarter, like early third quarter, when you came out and you saw instantly, boom, no, Becky did it again.
Yeah.
The Liberty, like that was the time to do it, and I should have, I did not. And I'm not listening to myself again
again.
I'm not listening to myself again, but I do think the difference is the halftime adjustments that we have seen. Those two halftime adjustments, I think, again, we're working in smallest of samples. These playoff series are really hard not to deal with small samples. So you kind of have to extrapolate, and those have been notable in both games. So I think that that's enough for me. And this isn't going to be a big play. This is going to be just so I have something to watch. Maybe a quarter of a unit, third of a unit. Nothing huge.
Okay. So then, yeah, if you see, the start of the third quarter, you'll know pretty early on, I think, if the aces are still just coming at them, or if, the Liberty are the ones coming out of the break with all that energy and all that oomph.
Exactly. I think that's the time to look for snowball, is that early to mid third quarter. I think that's exactly right.
All right. Sounds good. Now, let's talk a little bit about a prop perspective, if you don't mind, even if you're not necessarily going to be playing anything. I just it's so hard because we don't want to keep going, adding injury, but it's how it almost feels like, the last two games, like we said, JJ she should have gotten one more rebound. She should have gotten one more rebound. Is it just all right, that's it. We went full unit, we went half unit. Now we're just saying we're just staying away for now.
I think I am probably sitting out. I do feel like the hard thing is, if it were 2 games in the regular season, it's really easy to write off, right? You shouldn't be swayed by 2 games in the regular season. If you have a strong edge, a strong cap, don't be scared off by 2 games. But there is something about the finals where the microscope gets closer. And maybe this is where the sports fan in any sports bettor kind of takes over, and it's hard to fully think neutralize. Because I do think that JJ still has a huge edge, and it's been weird to see her in these second halves. It's almost like even though she has been the one who hasn't looked scared, she's almost looked pissed that her team is scared, and she just kind of hangs out on the perimeter and doesn't want to. She's she's getting hit hard on some of these fouls. She's kind of I don't want to go bang in the post if y'all aren't going to make a single shot and we're going to lose by 30. That's just not worth it.
And you know what? I think now that I'm thinking back to those second halves, part of the problem was there was no inside-outside game. So, yeah, she's naturally, as the game progresses, going to become less effective when the defense is realizing, well, the guards aren't doing shit anyway. So, let me just stay. We'll just focus on JJ in the second half. You know what I mean? So there's got to be an inside-outside game for it to be a healthy half-court offense.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I do remember at one point in the second half that JJ was out on the perimeter, and I thought to myself, no one else on this team can really get a rebound, and if she's out there, their aces are getting the rebound and they are running. So I really think that transition game for them was so deadly. But are there any other players that you might be interested in just entertaining?
Yeah, I think this might be the game where I think about Sabrina Ionescu. I always struggle with her name. I don't struggle with any of the other names. Sabrina's name throws me off the most of any name. I think this might be the one to look for an escalator. It feels at home, back against the wall, she has been silent all series. I think with her, I like the escalator a little bit more because she is so reliant on the 3 ball, and we've seen her have those huge games. So I think if you want to do a 25 plus, should be a nice big plus number. A 20 maybe is in the range where it's not even fully worth it. I think an escalator on her is maybe the one that you're thinking about, but I'm going to do this Liberty first half, Aces second half. Mm-hmm. If I feel incredibly bold, maybe I'll go back. My JJ rebounds is still my favorite of the ones that keep losing. So maybe that's the one that I will do. You'll have to keep an eye on the app. If you're able to be more analytical and removed and say it's only 2 games and she had 19 in the first half of the 2 combined, that's the one that I keep going back to. But it's hard to see those 2 games and think that there is something that's going to change in this one.
Right. Well, I think what's challenging is just when, I really think that you had a good Reed in particular on the prop side of things, or both of us, that we're so close, and maybe that's like naive of me, but also, you talk about sample size, and as a somewhat like newer, like regular better, I feel like the folks at Action Network that are experts and are really freaking good at what they do, like yourself included, like you have a process and you stick to it, and sometimes it doesn't go your way, but you kind of stick to it. And but I think, you know maybe it's just the momentous like occasion for me with this final series. Like, I still feel like some of the things we said in our process are probably accurate for game 3, but I don't want to stick to. I'm just too scared.
No, it's
too
such a good point.
From the last game.
Yeah, because it really is that I've done the work for this series. Not casuals here. I know that was that word was tossed out at one point. Definitely not casual. Have done the work and trust. I trust the work that I put into this, but it is genuinely hard when it's under this much of a microscope to keep going back to the well. So I think it's a very fine line, and I think it's something that even the most analytical bettors, like I've heard Rufus Peabody talk about, how there are stretches when that dude is one of the arguably the smartest bettor in the world, and there's times where he has crises of faith of do I definitely still have this edge? It's really tough, and it's a finals with a hyper microscope. It's tough to do. So I'm definitely there with you, and I think bettors shouldn't be scared to not bet sometimes. Yeah, don't be scared to bet, but maybe smaller. But yeah, don't be scared to not bet sometimes. If they win game 3, JJ has 17 rebounds. Suddenly we're like, okay, well let's start to look at things again.
By the way, one last thought from a betting standpoint, just the total here, 172.5. I think it was around that for the last 2 games as well. I wonder, I'm trying to do quick math. Do we feel it must have gone over, right? Because
both have gone over, and
Aces were so good, and Dano Mattia, our colleague who's been on the pod at times, made this point. I remember after game 1 being the Liberty haven't given up 99 points all year, right? And they did, and then they gave up even more with 104 in game 2. And so I'm actually kind of curious what the Aces team total might be. I don't have it out yet. I don't think I don't see it, but I'm curious, and I wonder if that's something to look at, because I wonder if that might be slightly inflated just because of how good they've been the last 2 games, or would it be kind of like what we see with the overall total where it's kind of hovering around the same?
No, it's a great look, and I really like that look as a team total under. I know people are going to be like, these guys have to be they're really giving another fade of the Aces, but I do think that's another one where you have multiple game scripts that land you there. I mean, it could just be that the Liberty offense no-shows, the Aces win by 20, but they don't get to 99 or whatever this.
It might not necessarily be an Aces fade for those of us.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a full Aces fade. It's more just saying this shooting regression is going to have to come a little bit once you go on the road. Now, maybe we know Chelsea Gray. She may be listening to this, just cackling, thinking I'm going to hit 18 mid-range floaters over Stewie.
Chelsea Gray in particular has just been so good. I mean,
I've got a hot take. And I was talking in our Action Slack with Brian Fonseca about this. He and I were both saying, kind of think that Chelsea should be the Finals MVP again. From a numbers perspective, it's that's kind of silly. Especially Jackie, Kelsey, and Asia are all going to probably have better numbers at this point. But I really do think that Chelsea is. If you watch this game, she is directing everything. She's got the camera going. She is the director out there, and I think she emotionally is. But I think just from an on-court perspective, she is one of the smartest players we've ever seen in this league. Who is among the rare athletes. It's really hard to see athletes truly step up in big moments. I think Bryce Harper is a person, and to get a little baseball shout here, he's one of those few people, he got insulted, he goes out and hits 2 homers. We don't see that from a lot of athletes. Chelsea Gray is one of those athletes who truly can elevate her game, and it's amazing to watch.
Yeah, and man, I mean, she definitely has taken it personally, the losses that they had against the Liberty this
Yeah.
season, in particular that Commissioner's Cup. I mean, which I understand, which I do. But you're right. Like she has she has an intangible thing about her that, she's a scary opponent. Like because she's just like you, everything you said, just so confident. I mean, she's like having another coach
Yeah.
out there, like on the floor with you. So I find that interesting. She had 14, but she had 11 assists in game two.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure she had 9 assists and 20 points in game one. But since you bring it up, I did want to ask you, do you think that finals MVP voters will sort of default to Asia at this point?
So I'm in New York where I can't see these things. Are you also in New York? Can you?
I'm in New York right now.
It's so silly that we can't even like see you have to go to weird routes to do it. So I would have to see the numbers. I do think that at this point in time it likely is going to be Asia, but I don't think it's a lock. And at least after game one, they had left Asia as the favorite. And after last night, I assume that's only going to be more likely. But I think the gap maybe isn't quite as intense as the odds are going to say. I'm doing this a little bit blind, so pardon me if, somehow the odds shifted a little bit. But I do think Chelsea, Kelsey, and Jackie are all having outstanding series. And if this somehow does go forward, we're only halfway through. If Asia does go back to struggling a little bit against Liberty, I think there is definitely room for others. So, I
do like that approach of like, okay, these the other players on the Aces do have a chance, and maybe taking a measured approach and potentially betting one or all of them in some way, because whether it's, the series, however long the series goes, if there might be a scenario where one of those players does something to win you the game, and that will be the difference in voters' minds. So I'm glad we did touch on that, but and I can't confirm at the moment, but pretty sure, like you said, Asia is still the favorite. All right. So Jim, I will see you in Brooklyn, and
I'm excited. I know it's weird. Ugh, I know that Liberty are down 2-0, but I'm very excited just to get in the door. And I think that Liberty fans understand that, like, so say the Aces do absolutely run over Liberty. I think there will be a respect there that's like, I think they'll get an ovation at the end, because I think it will be a hat tip of just, this is an incredible all-time team, and that you just have to kind of like, you're witnessing history, like, honestly. So I think it's going to be fun no matter what.
And regardless of the outcome, I want to talk about this from a slightly bigger picture standpoint, sort of with the history of the league and how far this league has come, particularly this year with the ratings and just like all the momentum behind it. The Liberty being the only original franchise to never win a championship, they have the first league MVP in franchise history this year. It's cool, whether they win or not. We love this rivalry. We hope this is a budding rivalry. We hope that we see some of these stars on the Liberty continue to play and contend at a high level. And like you said, we have to sit back and appreciate what these Aces are doing, because we know that we haven't seen a repeat champion in the WNBA in over 20 years. So whatever happens is amazing for the league. And that's, I think what both of us care about, regardless of, that we enjoy, betting and it's a hobby and all that. And I just hope that these Brooklyn fans that have been sort of starving for this, that they at least get a good showing, because I think, as Sandy said, she can live with the effort's there, and we're contesting every shot, and we're playing hard, and we lose. We can all live with that. Brooklyn fans can live with that. But to have another blowout where it's, I just don't think anyone wants to see that. Even if you're rooting for the Aces, I don't necessarily think you want to see that. I think we all want to see, a pretty good game, and then, go from there. So
this will be the eighth. Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. First of all, you summed it up so well, and now I'm going to come in and obnoxiously try and get one last word in. I'm sorry. I should have just let that sit, because that was so well said. All I wanted to say was that this will be the eighth game between them. I want to see a single possession game that's like close in the last second. That's all I want to see.
I mean, that would be so epic. Like, it would
Yes.
be so epic. But either way, would love to, along those same lines, would love to have it be a series, and would love to have, the Liberty not just roll over. So, but all respect to the Aces. They've been playing incredible. And this has been, an undefeated postseason run for them thus far. So you got to tip your cap. But all right, we got to get out of here. We'll get back to this once we recalibrate after game 3. So stay tuned. But thanks everybody for listening to Buckets, once again presented by BetMGM. I'm Maria Marino at Maria C Marino. Jim Turvey at Turvey Bets. Thanks again for joining me.
As always.
And don't forget to download the award-winning Action app where you can follow both of us. You can also rate and review this podcast to potentially win some Action swag or a free subscription to Action Pro. Let's get buckets.